The day my grandfather died, I didn't just lose the man who raised me. I lost my entire world. But what I didn't lose was the fight he taught me to carry, and the brilliant trap he had set for the woman who tried to steal everything from us both. The rain fell in sheets over Oak Grove Cemetery in Seattle, turning the manicured paths into rivers of mud. I stood before my grandfather Harrison Mitchell's casket, my black dress clinging to my skin, mascara probably streaking my face, though I didn't care. The man who had been my world, my teacher, my protector, was gone. Around me, people in expensive suits whispered condolences I couldn't hear over the roar of grief in my ears. That's when I felt her presence. Victoria Pierce, my stepmother, though I refused to call her that. She stood under a designer umbrella held by her assistant, her black Chanel suit pristine despite the weather. When our eyes met across the grave, she smiled. Actually smiled. It was a small, cold curve of her lips that made my blood run cold. She walked toward me with deliberate steps, her heels clicking on the wet stone pathway. When she reached me, she leaned in close enough that only I could hear her words over the rain. "I hope you enjoyed living in luxury while it lasted, Farah. The Mitchell estate belongs to me now. Your grandfather may have doted on you, but I was his wife. Everything he owned is mine." She paused, her smile widening. "I want you out of the house by tomorrow. Don't bother packing much, most of it was paid for with Mitchell money anyway." I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. My grandfather had just been lowered into the ground, and she was already kicking me out? "You can't do that," I managed to say, my voice hoarse from crying. Victoria laughed, loud enough that several people turned to look. "Can't I? Watch me." "Your grandfather was a sentimental old fool, but he was smart enough to make sure his wife was taken care of. Now get out of my sight. You're embarrassing yourself." She turned and walked away, her assistant scurrying after her. I stood there in the rain, shaking with a mixture of grief and fury so intense I thought I might shatter. Around me, people were beginning to leave, returning to their dry cars and warm homes. Nobody stopped to check on me. Nobody saw me as anything more than the grieving granddaughter, soon to be forgotten. But as I watched Victoria's car pull away from the cemetery, I saw someone else watching her too. Benjamin Carter, my grandfather's attorney, stood near a black sedan, his expression thoughtful. When he caught my eye, he gave me the smallest nod, so subtle I almost missed it. Then he got in his car and drove away. That tiny gesture was the only thing that kept me from completely falling apart. I returned to the Mitchell estate that evening, driving through the familiar iron gates for what I thought might be the last time. The house was a sprawling Tudor-style mansion in the Broadmoor neighborhood, one of Seattle's most exclusive areas. My grandfather had built his real estate empire from nothing, and this house was the crown jewel of his achievement. I had lived here since I was 6 years old, after my parents died in a car accident. My grandfather had taken me in without hesitation, raising me as if I were his own daughter. He had taught me everything he knew about business, about strategy, about never backing down from a fight. Some of my best memories were sitting in his study, listening to him explain market trends and investment strategies while the rain pattered against the windows. Now Victoria wanted to take it all away. I walked through the front door to find my belongings already packed in suitcases and boxes, stacked in the grand foyer like garbage waiting to be collected. My hands clenched into fists. She had been planning this. She had probably packed my things while I was at the funeral. "I see you got my message." I turned to see Victoria descending the curved staircase, now dressed in a silk robe, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked completely at ease, mistress of the house. "This is my home," I said, my voice shaking. "Was your home. Past tense." She took a sip of wine. "I have the papers right here if you'd like to see them." She pulled a document from her robe pocket and held it out. "Temporary residency agreement, signed by your grandfather 3 months ago. It terminated upon his death. I'm the sole owner of this property, Farah. You're trespassing." I snatched the paper from her hand, my eyes scanning the text. And there it was, my grandfather's signature at the bottom, clear as day. I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. Had he known? Had he planned to leave me with nothing? "I don't understand," I whispered. "Of course you don't. You were too busy playing the doting granddaughter to see the truth. Harrison loved his money more than he loved you. He made sure I was taken care of. And you?" She laughed. "You were just the charity case he kept around to make himself feel noble." Rage surged through me, white hot and blinding. I wanted to throw the paper in her face, to scream, to fight. But something my grandfather had taught me echoed in my mind. Never let them see you break. Never show weakness. Save your strength for when it counts. So instead, I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You're going to regret this." Victoria's smile faltered for just a second. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." I turned and grabbed 2 of my suitcases. "I'll be back for the rest tomorrow." "Security will have orders not to let you pass the gate," she called after me. "Anything you leave behind will be disposed of." I walked out into the rain without looking back. I spent that night in a cheap motel off Highway 99, the kind of place where the neon sign flickered and the walls were thin enough to hear every conversation in the neighboring rooms. It was the most I could afford with the cash I had on me. My credit cards were all linked to accounts Victoria now controlled. I sat on the lumpy bed, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, feeling more alone than I had since my parents died. My phone had been buzzing with messages, probably from Victoria's lawyers or the security company, but I couldn't bring myself to check. Then it rang with a number I recognized, Benjamin Carter. I answered on the second ring. Mr. Carter. Farah. His voice was warm, familiar. He had been my grandfather's attorney for 20 years, and I had known him my entire life. I'm so sorry about Harrison. He was a remarkable man. Thank you, I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. I need to see you, tomorrow, 10 a.m. at my office. It's about your grandfather's will. My heart sank. Victoria said everything goes to her. Victoria said a lot of things. There was something in his tone, something sharp and knowing. Your grandfather was always 3 steps ahead, Farah. He taught you that, didn't he? A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that tomorrow you need to be at my office. And Farah? He paused. Bring that fighting spirit Harrison loved so much. You're going to need it. I barely slept that night. My mind raced with possibilities, with memories of my grandfather's lessons about strategy and patience. He had always said that the best victories were the ones your opponent never saw coming. Had he known what Victoria would try to do? Had he prepared for this? The next morning, I dressed in the most professional outfit I had packed, a navy suit my grandfather had bought me for my last birthday. I took the bus to downtown Seattle, to the sleek glass tower where Carter's law firm occupied the top 3 floors. The rain had stopped, and weak autumn sunlight filtered through the clouds as I rode the elevator up. Benjamin Carter's office had floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of Elliott Bay. He stood as I entered, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Farah, thank you for coming. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. We're waiting for one more person. Who? Before he could answer, the door opened and Victoria swept in. She had clearly expected this meeting, dressed in a cream-colored suit, her hair perfectly styled. She looked at me with surprise that quickly morphed into disdain. What is she doing here? Victoria demanded. Sitting in on the reading of Harrison Mitchell's will, Benjamin said calmly, as is her right as a named beneficiary. Victoria's eyes narrowed. This is a waste of time. Harrison and I discussed everything. I know what's in the will. Do you? Benjamin's tone was mild, but there was steel beneath it. He pulled out a thick folder and set it on the desk. Shall we begin? I sat down, my heart pounding. Victoria remained standing, her arms crossed, radiating impatience and certainty. Benjamin opened the folder and began to read in a clear, measured voice. I, Harrison Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. The first section was everything Victoria had expected. The house, the cars, the joint bank accounts, all went to her as the surviving spouse. With each line, Victoria's smile grew more triumphant. She shot me a look that said, I told you so. But then Benjamin turned the page, and his tone shifted slightly. To my granddaughter, Farah Mitchell, whom I have loved and raised as my own daughter, I leave the following. Victoria scoffed. What, his cufflinks, his watch collection? Benjamin ignored her and continued reading. I leave to Farah Mitchell 51% controlling interest in Mitchell Global Holdings, including all subsidiaries, properties, and assets. Additionally, I grant her full voting rights and operational authority over all business decisions. The room went silent. I stared at Benjamin, unable to process what I had just heard. Mitchell Global Holdings was my grandfather's company, the real estate empire he had spent 40 years building. It was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Victoria's face had gone white. That's impossible. He wouldn't. He couldn't. I assure you, it's completely legal and binding. Benjamin pulled out another document. Harrison created a trust years ago, specifically to protect the company from being included in marital assets. Farah has been the beneficiary since she turned 18, though the transfer was contingent on Harrison's death. No, Victoria's voice was shrill now. This is fraud. She manipulated him, a senile old man who didn't know what he was signing. Harrison was evaluated by 3 separate doctors within the last month, Benjamin said, his voice cool. All confirmed he was of completely sound mind. In fact, he made several amendments to his will just 2 weeks before he passed, specifically regarding the conditions of Farah's inheritance. I found my voice. What conditions? Benjamin's eyes met mine, and I saw approval there. That brings us to the most interesting clause. He turned to another page. Your grandfather included a specific provision regarding Victoria's inheritance. Victoria had sunk into a chair, her face ashen. What provision? Harrison stipulated that if his widow attempted to remove Farah from the family home within 1 year of his death, All assets granted to said widow would be immediately forfeit and transferred to Farah Mitchell. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. I felt dizzy, almost lightheaded. My grandfather had known. He had known exactly what Victoria would do. The house, the cars, the bank accounts. Benjamin continued, all of it reverts to Farah if you violated the terms, which, according to the testimony of 3 staff members and security footage, you did yesterday. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You can't prove I threw her out. She left on her own. Actually, we can prove it quite thoroughly. Benjamin pressed a button on his desk, and a screen on the wall flickered to life. Security footage showed Victoria in the foyer, directing staff to pack my belongings. The timestamp was from 2 days ago, before my grandfather had even been buried. Then the audio played. Victoria's voice, clear and cold, instructing the staff to have everything ready for my removal immediately after the funeral. Make sure the gate codes are changed by evening. I don't want that girl setting foot on my property ever again. The video ended. Victoria looked like she might be sick. Additionally, Benjamin said, pressing another button, your grandfather recorded a video message for this occasion. He suspected you might try something like this. The screen changed, and suddenly my grandfather was there. He looked thin and tired, clearly recorded during his final weeks, but his eyes were alert and sharp as ever. Victoria, he said, and his voice sent chills down my spine. If you're watching this, it means you've done exactly what I knew you would. You've shown your true colors. You married me for my money, and you saw Farah as nothing more than an obstacle to your inheritance. On the screen, my grandfather shifted in his chair. I knew from the beginning what you were. I'm not a fool, despite what you may have thought. But I kept you around because I wanted to see if you would ever show a shred of decency, especially toward the girl I loved as my own. You failed that test spectacularly. Tears were streaming down my face. Victoria sat frozen, her face pale. Farah, my grandfather continued, his expression softening. If you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and you're probably hurting. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer, sweetheart. But I taught you everything I know. You're ready for this. The company is yours now. The house is yours. Everything I built is yours, because you're the only one who understood that it was never about the money. It was about the legacy, about building something that matters, and passing it on to someone who will protect it. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes seeming to look directly at me through the screen. Don't let anyone tell you you're not ready. Don't let anyone make you doubt your worth. You are a Mitchell, and that means you fight for what's right, you protect what's yours, and you never, ever back down. I love you, Farah. Make me proud. The screen went dark. I was openly crying now, not caring that Victoria and Benjamin could see. Those were my grandfather's final words to me, and they were everything I needed to hear. Benjamin gave me a moment to compose myself before speaking again. So, Victoria, the question now is what happens next? By the terms of the will, you have forfeited all assets granted to you. The house, the accounts, everything reverts to Farah. Victoria's hands were shaking. This is insane. I'll fight this. I'll take it to court. I'll prove he was coerced. You're welcome to try, Benjamin said mildly, but I should warn you that Harrison anticipated that as well. He had multiple witnesses to the creation and signing of this will, including Judge Morrison and Senator Reeves. Both are prepared to testify to his mental competence and his clear intentions. Victoria turned to me, her eyes desperate now. Farah, please, we can work something out. I made a mistake. I was grieving, not thinking clearly. I stood up, wiping my tears away. For the first time since my grandfather's death, I felt strong. Certain. You called me a charity case. You told me I meant nothing. You threw me out of my home on the day of his funeral. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. No, my voice was steady now. You said exactly what you meant, and now you're facing the consequences. I turned to Benjamin. What do I need to do? I'll need you to sign some paperwork, take possession of the company shares, and arrange for the transfer of the house deed. Victoria has 72 hours to vacate the premises. Victoria stood abruptly. I won't sign anything. I'll fight this with everything I have. That's your choice, Benjamin said. But I should mention that Harrison also included a clause stating that any legal challenges to this will would result in Victoria being responsible for all legal fees on both sides, should she lose. Given the ironclad nature of this document and the evidence we have, I'd estimate you're looking at several $100,000 in legal costs. Victoria's face crumbled. She looked at me with something close to hatred. You planned this. You manipulated him. I loved him, I said quietly. That's something you never understood. It was never about the money for me. It was about family. But you made your choice, and now you have to live with it. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door, then paused. You think you've won? You're 24 years old. You know nothing about running a company. You'll fail within a year, and when you do, everyone will know that Harrison made a mistake. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll fail trying to build something meaningful. All you ever tried to build was a bank account. She left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. Benjamin smiled. You handled that well. Did I? I feel like I'm going to throw up. He laughed. That's normal. You've just inherited a multi-million-dollar company and kicked your stepmother out of a mansion. It's been quite a morning. I don't know if I can do this, I admitted. Run the company. Victoria was right about one thing. I'm young, and I've never actually run anything. But you've been trained by the best. Benjamin leaned forward. Harrison didn't leave you the company on a whim, Farah. He spent years preparing you for this. Every conversation, every lesson, every late night in his study, that was all training. He believed in you. The question is, do you believe in yourself? I thought about my grandfather's video message, about everything he had taught me, about the trap he had so carefully laid for Victoria, knowing exactly how she would react. He had been 3 steps ahead, just like always. Yes, I said finally, I do. The next week was a whirlwind. I signed documents, met with department heads at Mitchell Global Holdings, and began the overwhelming process of understanding exactly what I had inherited. The company owned commercial real estate across the Pacific Northwest, with properties in Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver. There were residential developments, office buildings, and several hotels. It was massive, complex, and terrifying. But I had help. Benjamin introduced me to David Chen, a young investor who had worked with my grandfather on several projects. David was only a few years older than me, brilliant with numbers, and importantly, someone my grandfather had trusted. He wanted me to look out for you. David told me over coffee in my first week. Harrison knew this would be overwhelming. He asked me to be available as an advisor, no strings attached. Why would you do that? I asked suspiciously. I was learning quickly that in business, nothing came without a price. David smiled. Because Harrison gave me my start when no one else would. I was fresh out of business school, and he took a chance on me. I owe him everything. Helping you is how I pay that debt. With David's help, I began to understand the scope of what my grandfather had built. More importantly, I began to see how he had structured everything with me in mind. There were projects he had started but left unfinished, with notes that seemed directed at me. This is where you'll make your mark. One note read, trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to take risks. Meanwhile, Victoria was making good on her threat to fight. She filed legal challenges, contacted business partners trying to undermine my authority, and gave interviews to local media, painting herself as the grieving widow cheated out of her inheritance by a manipulative granddaughter. It hurt, seeing my name dragged through the mud. But Benjamin was right. The will was ironclad, and every legal challenge Victoria mounted fell apart under scrutiny. Within a month, her lawyers were advising her to settle. The settlement meeting took place at Benjamin's office on a gray November morning. Victoria arrived with her attorney, looking diminished somehow. The designer clothes couldn't hide the fact that she had lost. She knew it, her lawyer knew it, and I knew it. My client is prepared to accept the terms of the will without further contest, her attorney said formally. In exchange, she requests a reasonable settlement that acknowledges her 3 years of marriage to Mr. Mitchell. I had discussed this with Benjamin beforehand. We could offer her nothing, force her to leave with only what she had brought into the marriage, or we could be generous. I thought about what my grandfather would do. He had been tough in business but never cruel for cruelty's sake. $1 million, I said, paid out over 5 years, in exchange for dropping all legal challenges and signing a non-disclosure agreement regarding the family and the company. Victoria's lawyer looked surprised. That's very generous. It's more than she deserves, I said, looking directly at Victoria, but my grandfather built his reputation on integrity. I won't start mine by being petty. Victoria met my eyes for the first time since entering the room. Thank you, she said quietly. It might have been the first genuine thing she had ever said to me. Don't thank me. Thank the man you underestimated. I stood up. We're done here. She signed the papers, and just like that, it was over. Victoria Pierce walked out of my life forever. 6 months later, I was sitting in what had been my grandfather's office at Mitchell Global Holdings, now mine. The desk was the same. The view of downtown Seattle was the same. But everything else had changed. I had made changes to several projects, implemented new sustainability initiatives, and started a scholarship program for young people who had lost their parents, just as I had. The company was thriving. More than that, I was thriving. I had found my place, my purpose. I wasn't just maintaining what my grandfather had built. I was expanding it, improving it, making it mine. David knocked on my door, poking his head in. Got a minute? There's someone here who wants to meet you. Who? Judge Morrison. He was one of the witnesses to your grandfather's will. I stood up, straightening my suit jacket. Send him in. Judge Morrison was an elegant man in his 70s, with white hair and kind eyes. He shook my hand warmly. Farah Mitchell, Harrison talked about you constantly. I'm glad to finally meet you properly. Thank you for being there, I said, for witnessing the will. It was my honor. Harrison was one of my oldest friends. He paused, looking around the office. He'd be proud of what you're doing here, the scholarship program especially. That was pure Harrison, seeing beyond profit to impact. He taught me that business should mean something beyond making money. He did. Judge Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He asked me to give you this, 6 months after his death. He said you'd be ready to hear it by then. My hands trembled slightly as I took the envelope. My grandfather's handwriting on the front simply said, Farah. I'll leave you to read that privately, the judge said. But before I go, I want you to know something. What you did with Victoria, offering her that settlement when you could have left her with nothing, that took character. Harrison would have done the same thing. You really are his granddaughter. After he left, I sat down and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, my grandfather's familiar script covering the page. My dear Farah, if you're reading this, then you've made it through the worst of it. You've fought Victoria's challenges, taken control of the company, and begun to make it your own. I knew you would. I never doubted you for a second. By now, you probably understand why I did things the way I did. Why I married Victoria, knowing what she was. Why I set the trap that would reveal her true nature. Why I structured everything to put you in a position where you'd have to fight for what was yours. It wasn't cruelty, sweetheart. It was the final lesson. You needed to know that you could fight and win, that you could face betrayal and come out stronger. That you didn't need me to protect you anymore because you could protect yourself. You've spent your whole life in my shadow, learning from me, following my path. But this company, this legacy, it's not mine anymore. It's yours. And I can't wait to see what you do with it, whatever that may be from wherever I am now. Build something beautiful, Farah. Build something that matters. And remember that even though I'm gone, you're never alone. You carry everything I taught you, every lesson, every value, every bit of love I had for you. That's the real inheritance, not the money, or the buildings, or the company. It's the strength to stand on your own, the wisdom to make good choices, and the heart to do what's right even when it's hard. I love you, my brilliant girl. Forever your biggest fan, Grandpa Harrison. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Then I carefully folded it and placed it in my desk drawer, right next to a photo of the 2 of us from my college graduation. That evening, I stood at the window of my office, watching the sun set over Elliott Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The city stretched out before me, full of lights and life and possibility. I thought about everything that had happened. The grief, the betrayal, the fight, the victory. I thought about Victoria, wherever she was now, and hoped she had found some kind of peace. I thought about my grandfather, and the elaborate chess game he had played to ensure I would be exactly where I needed to be. But mostly, I thought about the future. About the company I would build, the legacy I would create, the person I would become. My grandfather had given me the foundation, but the structure I built on top of it would be entirely my own. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Staff dinner tonight to celebrate the Belltown project approval. You coming? I smiled and typed back, wouldn't miss it. I grabbed my coat and headed for the elevator, my heels clicking on the marble floor. As I walked through the lobby of Mitchell Global Holdings, past the portrait of my grandfather that hung near the entrance, I paused and looked up at him. I hope I'm making you proud, Grandpa, I whispered. And somehow, I knew he was smiling down at me, proud of the woman I had become and excited for everything I would accomplish. Victoria had tried to steal my inheritance, to convince me I was worthless, to take everything my grandfather had built for me. She had failed spectacularly because she had never understood the most important lesson my grandfather taught me. True power isn't something that can be stolen. It's something you build within yourself, brick by brick, choice by choice, challenge by challenge. And once you have that kind of power, the kind that comes from knowing your own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it, no one can ever take it away. I walked out into the Seattle evening, ready for whatever came next, because I was Farah Mitchell, granddaughter of Harrison Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Global Holdings, and I was just getting started. The stolen legacy had been reclaimed, and the best revenge was the empire I would build in honor of the man who believed in me when it mattered most.